In 2015, Nobel Peace Prize winner Angus Deaton and Ann Case published a study they'd found revealing that working-class white American mortality rate was dropping. The cause of death? Increasing drug overdoses, alcohol-related diseases, and suicide. They called it death by despair. The study also brought attention to something more revealing. Among the working-class white Americans being affected by the phenomenon, the increase was greater among men. Today we're going to take a look into what working class men may really be fighting against. I'm Glenn Epps, and this is a look at the new silent killer. Dr. Tiffany Field, founder and director of Touch Research Institute at the University of Miami, School of Medicine, agrees that loneliness may be a leading factor in these findings, but also says that lack of touch may contribute as well.
Because I believe that loneliness, even though we don't have studies that document it, contributes significantly to depression, and we know that depression contributes to suicidal thoughts. So I think if men are feeling more deprived of touch and more lonely, they're likely to be more depressed, which probably explains the greater suicide rate.
Feelings of loneliness have increased substantially in recent years. In 1970, 11% of people reported regular feelings of loneliness. In 1980, it was 20%. And in 2010, the number verged on 50%. In 2013, 3 out of every 4 adults agreed that Americans suffer from skin hunger. Touch hunger, or skin hunger, is a term some psychologists have used to describe the need to experience physical human contact. Jan Kandror, a bookstore owner and self-proclaimed hermit, lives in Homer, Alaska. Just a few years ago after his marriage fell apart, he found himself in a new relationship, but not before experiencing a long period of isolation. That relationship has now ended, and Jan knows that whatever future lays before him now will include solitude, and more specifically, more isolation. This is a letter he wrote, read by Alfio Vasta.
I spend up to a whole day by myself, probably on average 2 or 3 days a week, and up to 7 to 8 hours on other days. During the winter, my store is open only 3 days a week, and while sometimes I have quite a few customers and visitors, there are many days, like today, when only 2 people came in during the whole day.
Homer, Alaska is about 3 times the size of Ithaca, New York, with only a population of 5,000.
I don't touch people very often, almost never, and I admit that mostly I avoid it, but I miss it terribly. There are short hugs and handshakes almost never with men.
In 2000, the U.S. Census reported that over a quarter of the U.S. population lived alone, up from 7% in 1940, and of the 2.5 million people ages 45 to 64 living alone, men accounted for 58%.
Well, I think men have been reared in traditional societies like our own until maybe very recently. They've been reared as having the need to be on the assertive side, as having to initiate, as having to be considered the dominant of the two genders, and they get treated that way by parents and by teachers. They're treated to be autonomous, independent, strong, courageous, all of those kinds of qualities that give men the sense that they need to assert themselves and be in a giving rather than a recipient kind of mind state. And so, for example, when a man loses a spouse, the man is more likely to remarry or to die, within the first year of the wife's death.
Divorced men have 2 to 6 times greater a chance of dying than unmarried men.
And those are statistics. There are statistics on those phenomena. So men will more likely seek out someone, will be more likely married within the first year after losing spouse, whereas women are more inclined to get involved with their social network of other women.
In her book Touch, Field says men's aversion to touch starts in childhood. Men and women have been socialized differently to react to touch. Because daughters are seen as inferior, they are often touched more than sons, who in turn begin to behave aggressively due to their lack of touch, And because of their aggression, we think we should touch them even less. That's not true.
Both, those are both the most, uh, the lowest touch cultures of all the cultures that have been studied.
She's speaking about England and the United States.
And when you look at Mediterranean cultures, for example, France and Spain, you see older men are engaging in lots of physical activity with each other, playing bowls and getting together and showing affection towards each other than we see in our country. And the studies that were done, there are some cafe studies that were done many years ago in places like the UK, the US, France, and Spain, and they found that in the 30-minute period, the people in the UK cafes and the US cafes maybe touched each other once, whereas the French people touch each other 30 times in that same period of time. And if you look at a graph from the CDC of the graphs have been done on homicide in young adult males, and the U.S. is off the graph, and in France and Spain you can hardly see the bar. We know from our own studies, comparing children in Paris with children in Miami, that children in Paris receive more physical affection on playgrounds from their parents, and they're less physically and verbally aggressive towards their peers. If you look at adolescents in Paris and Miami, we found very similar effects, comparisons that we made in McDonald's in those two places, and found that teenagers in McDonald's in Paris were much more physically affectionate with each other, and they were less verbally and physically aggressive than the adolescents in Miami.
And it's a cycle. Boys are raised to behave like men, to be autonomous and not be dependent on touch and platonic intimacy, causing them to behave aggressively, and people to treat the aggression like a barrier against physical intimacy. In his article, Why Traditional Manhood is Killing Us, Mark Green, a writer for the Good Men Project, lists the rules of traditional masculinity. The first, real men don't show their emotions. Anger, yes, but little else. He calls the behaviors detailing traditional masculinity the man box. Maury Perricon, a college student from Brooklyn, said he doesn't subscribe to the rules of traditional masculinity. He does know them very well. He said that in the grand scheme of things, the rules, they just don't make sense.
I'm like an outlier because I'm like very effeminate, so I think touch, compassion, and empathy, all these ideas that like relate to connectivity with your fellow person, I think that came easily because I am so effeminate. And I think if I was more testosterone-y, more masculine, I wouldn't think that type of connection would be okay. Because I would always have this idea that, oh crap, society doesn't expect me to be as affectionate as I am, because to everyone else that could be seen as a weakness. And I know that men are expected not to show any emotion. They're expected not to show their true feelings and only show it when they need to. When in reality, it's like, you have friends for a reason. You make these connections for a reason. If you can't like share parts of yourself to the very people you surround yourself with, one day it's gonna like explode, and it's gonna be detrimental to you and the people around you.
Social and emotional isolation, according to numerous studies recorded by the American Public Health publication, say that smoking and social isolation can often be equal predictors of mortality. In some studies, social isolation influenced mortality among men, even more so when coupled with a current smoking status, being unmarried, and a lack of club or religious affiliations.
Ooh, okay. So I usually notice the idea of being alone whenever I have nothing to do. Luckily, these past few months I've been a busy boy, so like I have not been alone, and whenever I am alone, I don't consider being alone, I consider it more like, oh, this is my me time. But before, when I wasn't really well established on campus or didn't have as many activities as I do now, those periods of like not being with other people, they would have translated to like negative thoughts, as in, why am I not with people? Like, do people not like me? Am I gonna be alone forever? Like these really dark things that like I'm sure like everyone thinks about and are kind of nonsensical. But when you're left to your own thoughts, and when there's nothing else to distract you, when you have to face your true self, I guess, I think that's when you're most vulnerable to have thoughts of loneliness or depression.
On the other side of the coin and the country, following his breakup, Jan has started smoking again and is finding dissatisfaction with the amount of isolation he has to look forward to. The bouts of depression he will experience will be tough to overcome with only a social network of one.
I get extremely lonely now almost all of the time, and before I met her I would get lonely, especially in the evenings very often. I'm not happy about being a hermit. I wish there were few people around me. I can be very gregarious with the right people, but I don't feel comfortable in large crowds. I absolutely prefer one-on-one interactions. I generally feel pretty healthy, but I have weak lungs, and lately I have been smoking a lot of tobacco, out of feeling extremely lonely, and that seriously undermined feeling of general well-being. Before that, though, I smoked a lot of marijuana, and that didn't affect me badly at all. I very rarely get sick. If I stick to my diet, I don't have problems with digestion, but I am depressed almost all of the time, and feel anxiety when I'm around people.
Well, there are all kinds of physiological and biochemical changes that occur, especially when you're receiving touch that involves some kind of pressure, like in a handshake or in a hug, or in massage, which is the most studied touch. And that is that the touching puts the organism puts the human in a more relaxed state by lowering their heart rate, by lowering their blood pressure. Their brain waves change in the direction of greater relaxation. And the stress hormone called cortisol, which is the chief culprit hormone in the system, is reduced. And when you reduce cortisol, you can save natural killer cells, which kill bacteria, viral, and cancer cells. So that explains a lot of the health benefits. There's also, when you receive touch, there's an increase in serotonin levels, which is our body's natural anti-pain and antidepressant. And there's an increase in dopamine, which is an activating neurotransmitter.
Dopamine is the chemical responsible for feelings of happiness.
There are lots of massage studies, and there are some studies on the social emotional value of touch, but there's very little on what happens to you if you're deprived of touch. Very hard to do that study. We have studies from the Romanian orphanages that show that children who aren't touched fail to thrive. They don't reach their expected growth on any dimensions, and they're also very autistic-like, and some of them die from touch deprivation.
Males are at a significant disadvantage starting at birth. When comparing a male-female twin pair, doctors have acknowledged that the male twins are born with less stable heart rate, respiration, and brainwave activity. They are found more likely to end up in the intensive care unit, and the one proven remedy to their unstable condition? Touch. Dr. Field has already proven its success in hospitals in her area.
Massage does all of those things that I mentioned earlier, that whole chain of events where massage decreases heart rate and blood pressure and cortisol levels, and increases natural killer cells so that bacteria, viral, and cancer cells are reduced. So that contributes to their health. And certainly when your health is better, so is your emotional and your social well-being.
Men are not the exception to the rule of physical platonic intimacy. Touch is a necessary facet of every biological organism's life. We've seen monkeys, rats, and babies die because of lack of touch. We've even heard of plants responding positively to touch. Touch helps avoid feelings of isolation, depression, and can even have more physical health effects. With skin being the largest organ on the body, it's surprising we've been able to ignore it for so long.